Howdy folks, and welcome back to Armoured Warfare with the mighty Jingles. Yes, it has been quite some time, and yes, there have been quite some changes in Armoured Warfare since I last took a look at it. First things first, however, you should be aware that this video is sponsored by My.com, the publishers and developers of Armoured Warfare, which is kind of nice. It's always good to be paid to, to play games that you're going to be playing anyway. And one of the benefits of this being a sponsored video is that My.com have got some stuff for me to give away to you lot as well. I have a code which is popping up on screen right now, and it can be redeemed at the link in the video description, and will give you access to the LAV 150-90 Mercenary Edition premium vehicle, as well as 3 days of premium time and 3 gold loot chests. This code can be redeemed 1,000 times, so first come first serve. Beat the rush, pause the video, check the link in the video description, head on over to the website and input this code. Get yourself some free stuff. Speaking of free stuff, Armoured Warfare of course is a free-to-play game, and they've just had their Steam release, and if you've bought the game on Steam you may or may not be aware that there's also some free DLC for the Steam players, the Type 59-2A Premium Tier 3 main battle tank, as well as another 3 days of premium time. So if you have Armoured Warfare on Steam, head over to the Armoured Warfare Steam webpage and check the available DLC. You may have missed it. Yet another freebie. Anyway, with that out of the way, Armoured Warfare, how's it any different from the last time I played? Those of you who've watched my previous Armoured Warfare videos will no doubt be aware that I was a little disappointed when My.com took over development from Obsidian Entertainment and began to take the game in a different direction. I was quite keen to see what kind of RPG elements Obsidian were going to bring to Armoured Warfare, but in retrospect I suspect that I may have been in the minority there. Most players really just want something that's like World of Tanks, but with modern vehicles, and modern vehicle mechanics, and that's pretty much what Armoured Warfare is, and that's the direction that My.com wanted to take the game, and certainly from a business perspective it does make a lot of sense. Everybody wants a slice of that World of Tanks pie. It's a very, very big and fat pie. And making the game unlike World of Tanks too much, you run the risk of potentially alienating and confusing a large number of your potential player base. And while taking the safe approach has led to accusations of Armoured Warfare being nothing more than a World of Tanks clone with modern vehicle skins, there is still enough sufficiently different about Armoured Warfare for it to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And it's largely due to the fact that these are modern military vehicles, and they're very, very different from the kind of vehicles that you typically see in games like World of Tanks and War Thunder. A modern main battle tank has an exceptionally powerful gun and extremely potent ammunition to be fired from that gun that can penetrate hundreds and hundreds of millimeters of effective armour. It needs that kind of gun to penetrate the frontal armour of other main battle tanks. The problem faced by modern tank designers is if you're going to equip that kind of gun on your tank, as well as giving your tank the kind of armour protection at the front that will give it a fighting chance against other tanks armed with the same kinds of gun, and you want your tank to be able to move any faster than walking pace, you cannot afford to give it that kind of protection all over. If you were to look at a historical tank that you may play in World of Tanks, the Tiger for example, it has 120mm of armour at the front, but it also has 80mm of armour at the side, and that's a fairly healthy ratio of front to side armour. What that means is that in a game like World of Tanks, side-scraping your tank, angling up, and trolling people into shooting at your heavily angled side armour, and watching their shells bounce off ineffectually, is actually quite a valid gameplay tactic. But things that work in World of Tanks are not going to work in Armoured Warfare because these are modern main battle tanks. The T-80, for example here, has a gun with 640mm of penetration and frontal armour to give it a fighting chance against other tanks firing the same kind of gun at it. So what's the side armour like on the T-80? Well, it's exactly the same as the World War II Tiger, 80mm of effective armour. When all of the armour on your tank is packed into the front and you only have that level of side protection, you really don't want to be encouraging people to shoot into the side of your tank when they're firing guns that have 640mm of penetration. It's not going to work. And it was fundamental differences in gameplay mechanics like that that led to one of the biggest issues that I had in the past with Armoured Warfare player versus player battles. Because what it meant was that as soon as one team started losing tanks, it became very, very difficult for them to come back and clutch a win. Because if you're outnumbered and you're trying to present your best armour towards 2 enemy tanks, you've got a fighting chance. But if you're trying to keep the front of your tank pointing towards 4 enemy tanks, you're doomed. Well, unless you're playing complete idiots and they all just sit there in front of you bouncing shots off your turret. But there's a reasonable chance that one of them is going to be able to think and breathe at the same time, and he's going to work his way onto your flanks. And, well, you're just going to lose. There's no way you can defend against that. Well, I'm very happy to report that isn't really so much of an issue in Armoured Warfare PvP anymore, and it's not because they've changed the way the tanks are armoured, or they've messed around with the penetration of the guns. No. They're still keeping things as true to real life as they possibly can. But what they've done has actually solved a number of problems that I had in the past with Armoured Warfare PvP in one fell swoop. They've just reduced the team sizes. Yeah, that was a pretty simple solution, really, wasn't it? The battles are typically 5v5. If you're still getting outflanked when there are only 5 players on the enemy team, you're doing something wrong. It's not the game's fault. And this one single change has also brought some very, very welcome benefits for the matchmaking, influencing the length of time that you sit in a queue waiting to get into a battle. Armoured Warfare has always had problems with a fairly low player base, particularly on the North American server, and it was not unusual to sit in queue for 10, 15 minutes, possibly even longer, waiting for the matchmaker to find 12 or 15 players for each team and populate them with a balanced spread of vehicle types. But if the matchmaker only has to find 10 players, 5 on each team, it's getting you into matches 3 times as quickly. It's actually getting you into matches faster than 3 times as quickly, because the games are shorter. If you only have 5 players in each team, you're not going to be spending 20 minutes in each battle. So not only is the matchmaker populating teams 3 times faster than it was before, it's also circulating them back into the queues a lot faster than it was before. And these lengthy queues of waiting to get into a battle, they're just not happening anymore. It's still not instant, but it's a damn sight better than it used to be. I never really used to enjoy PvP in Armoured Warfare, for all the reasons that I've listed, but I'm actually finding it quite fun now. Another thing that Armoured Warfare has always done, which has helped with the queue times, was to show you precisely how many people were queuing at each tier and in each type of vehicle. So you could plainly see that if you were determined to queue up in your Challenger 2, for example, Tier 9 British main battle tank, it would show you exactly how many other people were queuing in your matchmaking spread. So you would know if it was a waste of time attempting to get into a game in your Challenger 2 because there were just too few other people queuing within that same matchmaking spread. So these lengthy queue times in Armoured Warfare are largely a thing of the past. The games themselves are over a lot faster, and the gameplay is a lot more fluid and dynamic because there aren't hordes of enemy tanks camping ridgelines anymore with only 5 players on each team, so you can afford to get out there and drive your tank. And of course, one final and not insignificant factor of these smaller team sizes, well, if you're playing on a team of 15 players and you're the only person on your team who can tell the difference between their arse and their elbow, it doesn't really matter how good you are, it's going to be really, really hard for you to carry that team to victory. But with a team of 5 players, if you're any good and you know what you're doing, you can have a significantly greater impact on your chance of the teams actually winning. Now, the PvP, of course, isn't the only thing that Armoured Warfare did slightly differently to other tank games. Armoured Warfare has always, deservedly so, received a lot of praise for its co-op battles. Armoured Warfare isn't the only game of this type, and it wasn't even the first game of this type that would allow you to play against AI bots. War Thunder, for example, has always allowed you to play historical engagements against the AI, recreating famous battles from World War II. But in War Thunder, these historical engagements were part of campaign packs that you had to pay for and download as DLC. In Armoured Warfare, this has always been part of the game experience right from the get-go. Possibly inspired by the success and popularity of Armoured Warfare's co-op battles, recently War Thunder introduced a new co-op game mode, but it's nowhere near as sophisticated as the kind of co-op battles that you get in Armoured Warfare. In War Thunder, you simply sit with your teammates on a single spawn point and defend yourselves against incoming waves of enemy tanks that spawn from all directions around you. It's really more of a last man standing game mode than a proper co-op battle like you get here in Armoured Warfare. World of Warships players have always been able to play co-op battles since the release of that game, but again, the co-op battle mode in World of Warships is kind of boring, unsophisticated, and unexciting, and also very unprofitable to play. You will probably lose more money than you earn playing co-op battles in World of Warships. Armoured Warfare led the way in promoting co-op as a viable alternative to PvP as a means of progressing down the tech trees in your game. And I'm pretty sure, although I obviously don't have any proof, but it's my hunch, that it was the success and popularity of Armoured Warfare's co-op battles that led directly to the introduction of a much more sophisticated PvE operations mode in World of Warships, a mode where the objectives and the gameplay is very, very similar to that of a co-op battle in Armoured Warfare. And World of Tanks, of course, has absolutely nothing like this. Now, while the bots in an Armoured Warfare co-op battle are not going to win any prizes for intelligence, the way the game manages the bots and the players by the system of rolling objectives which must be completed for mission success is what keeps the game interesting and moderately challenging. At its most basic level, what they do in an Armoured Warfare co-op battle is they present you with a choice, and you have to evaluate the risks associated with those choices. For example, you'll have an objective that you need to get to within a certain time limit. Between you and that objective, there are going to be a number of enemy tanks. There may also be some other enemy tanks rushing to get to that objective before you do. You may have enemy tanks on the flanks, rather than in a direct line between you and that objective. So the choice that you have to make is how much of a risk are you willing to take? How much of your tank are you willing to expose to enemy tanks that may be on your flanks in order to ensure that you get to the objective in time? And if you're not prepared to take that kind of risk, then you're probably going to survive with most of your health pool intact, but you're not going to have a lot of time left to get to that objective, and there are probably going to be a lot more enemy tanks that have made it successfully to that objective before you, which is going to make it even harder for you to take the objective from them when you get there. It's all about balancing risk, as well as scoring more points and doing more damage than your teammates. The game will then of course throw in secondary objectives, which are nowhere near the primary objective. Again, it's all about calculating risk versus benefit. And it works very, very well. It's hugely entertaining, and it's also as profitable as doing well in a PvP battle. Another factor that didn't hurt the popularity of co-op battles was the fact that teams were only ever 5 players, so the matchmaker didn't have nearly as hard a time finding 4 of the teammates to stick you into a battle with. And what had been happening in the past was that people were queuing up for a PvP battle, they couldn't get into a game, and so they would try co-op battles as well, just to get their Armoured Warfare fix. Which was great news for the people playing co-op battles, but not so good for the people who were still sticking to their guns and attempting to get into a PvP battle, because there were just fewer and fewer people queuing up as people got bored with waiting. Of course, with the changes to the PvP matchmaking, teams of 5 in PvP now as well, as mentioned earlier, that problem is largely a thing of the past. Armoured Warfare also introduced another game mode called Global Ops. Global Ops is PvP, it's still available for play, but it had elements of co-op battle in it, particularly some AI opponents and the rolling objective system that you see here in co-op. And it did have the potential to do extremely well. It was a very, very good game mode. The problem was that it never really caught off because of those PvP queue times. When you had a limited server population of people sitting in the PvP queues, if you introduce a second PvP game mode, separate from the regular PvP random battles, all you're really doing is halving the number of people available to queue for either PvP game mode, which meant even longer queue times and even more dissatisfied and unhappy players. Sadly, Global Ops hasn't really taken off in the way that it deserved to, although hopefully, with increased server populations and reduced queue times due to the new matchmaking in PvP, we'll see that situation change in the very near future. So, Armoured Warfare co-op battles always have been a fun and relaxing alternative from PvP in Armoured Warfare, and that situation has never really changed. It still is. Well, I'll say that situation has never really changed, but with the introduction of the latest update to Armoured Warfare, version 0.23 Caribbean Crisis, that situation has changed. If there was ever any criticism levelled at Armoured Warfare's co-op battle game mode, it was that it was just a little too easy. Well, I don't know about that. I've had plenty of teams in co-op battle in Armoured Warfare that were entirely capable of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. But, well, there was certainly some basis to that complaint. But if you do think that the co-op battles are just too easy, and you yearn for something slightly more challenging, my.com have you covered. Patch 0.23 introduced Caribbean Crisis, Special Operations Campaign Mode. These are a series of very challenging co-op battles that have to be completed one after the other. Caribbean Crisis consists of 3 new missions that are available in either standard or hardcore difficulty, and the rewards are appropriate to the challenge involved in completing these missions. They are very, very profitable if you're good enough to complete them. But, well, that's the catch, isn't it? If you're good enough to complete them. This is the 3rd chapter of the Caribbean Crisis co-op campaign, and I haven't completed it yet, despite several attempts. In fact, it took me several attempts to complete the first 2 missions in the Caribbean Crisis campaign, and it wasn't because my teammates sucked, it was because they're bloody hard. They're like regular co-op battles, except with the difficulty turned up to 11. I've played enough of this one by now, unsuccessfully, in order to have figured out one particular tactic for making at least the first half of this particular battle a lot more manageable. See the first capture point? It's indicated by a red cross on the map. I'll put an arrow on screen pointing to it so you can see it. Yeah? Don't take that capture point. I mean, you're probably going to have to drive through it, but don't stop in there, and don't take it until you've been to the city up here and you've cleared out the battalion of enemy tanks that are waiting in there for you. The reason you want to do that is because as soon as you take this capture point, the enemy unleash a bunch of laser defences which are going to shoot down stuff that you don't really want to get shot down, and if you don't take them out in the time limit, you're going to fail the mission. And there's an entire battalion of enemy tanks in the city between you and them. That are going to make life very, very difficult and nigh impossible for you. These are the tanks in the city that I'm talking about. We've already knocked out half a dozen of them, and they just keep coming. And there are some very, very tough tanks down there. You can imagine what it would be like trying to fight your way through this lot to get to those defensive laser positions without getting yourself slaughtered in order to knock them out before the time limit expires. So there's a top tip for you. If you've managed to make it through to Chapter 3 of the Caribbean Crisis campaign missions, do not take that capture point until you've killed this lot. This was the first time I'd even gotten this far in the 3rd chapter of Caribbean Crisis, but once you've successfully neutralised these enemy tanks in the city, you'll notice our artillery is in position and has already started capping the initial objective. Once he does that, the lasers are going to pop up, and since we've now dealt with all of the enemy tanks in the city, those lasers are going to be completely undefended. And there they go, they've popped up, and we can just take them out, completely unopposed. So that's nice and easy. But, well, there are more surprises waiting. From this point on, I'm in completely uncharted territory. I've never made it this far in Chapter 3 of Caribbean Crisis before. So once we've taken out those lasers, and the team are already polishing them off, we just have to sit in this capture circle, which should be hotly contested by an entire battalion of enemy tanks. So with the city firmly in our control, the next primary objective pops up: capture the enemy secondary air defense position, and that's on the island in the bay not far from where we actually began the mission. There's also another secondary objective popped up: destroy enemy helicopters, and certain members of the team have obviously played this far before. They're already in position and knocking those helicopters out, which has a very, very tight time limit on it, by the way. Now, the secondary objectives are of course entirely optional. You're not going to fail the mission if you don't complete the secondaries, but completing as many secondaries as possible obviously gives you bigger rewards. You get more achievements, you unlock things like exclusive decals and camouflages, all kinds of good stuff like that. This secondary air defense position is of course very, very heavily defended by pillboxes, and they're entirely capable of doing a lot of damage to your tank if you don't knock them out quickly. This is where something like having an artillery on your team can be immensely beneficial, and in fact I'm pretty sure it was the artillery that knocked out the pillbox that was shooting at me. But this position now needs to be captured. The surprises are not going to end there, however. Again, this is completely uncharted territory for me. I've never made it this far through Chapter 3 of Caribbean Crisis, so I was unaware of what was going to happen once we had completed the capture of this secondary defense position. The first very unwelcome surprise was the counterattack that's launched on the position that we've just taken over. We now have to hold this position against lots and lots of very heavily armed enemy tanks, but that's not all. There's another position on the map, which also, remember the first base? Yeah, that's also coming under counterattack. And we're all over here, and they're already starting to cap. So you can see where the challenge comes from here. You have to be able to take this position with enough tanks to knock out all of the defending forces without everybody dying, as well as leave enough tanks here to defend it against the counterattack while still getting tanks over to that position over there, which we failed to do, and we failed the mission. This is not easy, and it's a welcome change in difficulty from the regular PvE operations. So, Armoured Warfare, patch 0.23, Caribbean Crisis. There's an awful lot that's changed in Armoured Warfare. If you've been away from it for a while, as I have, there's a lot that's changed for the better, particularly with regards to PvP. You no longer sit around for 15 or 20 minutes, particularly if you're playing on the North American server, waiting to get into a game thanks to the changes to the matchmaking system. The battles are now 5 versus 5. It's easier to get into a game, the battles are quicker, so the players are recycled back into the matchmaking queue even faster. It's an exponential decrease in the amount of time that you sit waiting in a queue in order to get a game. The PvE is just as exciting and fun as ever, and for those of us who found the PvE co-op battles a little too boring, well, there's the PvE Special Operations campaign to kick the crap out of you and make you reevaluate just how difficult co-op battles can be. There's a lot to like about Armoured Warfare these days, and I have been playing it a lot more. If you've never played Armoured Warfare before, it is a free-to-play game. All it's going to cost you is a download. If you have played Armoured Warfare before and you got bored with it, well, hopefully I've shown you enough to whet your interest. Maybe it's worth another shot. The decision, of course, is always yours. All I can do is show you what's changed, show you what's new, and you can draw your own conclusions. But I'm definitely playing this again, and I've been having a lot of fun in it, in the length of time that it's took me to put this video together. So, Armoured Warfare, patch 0.23, Caribbean Crisis. It's not bad. That's it for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.